Welcome to Sight and Scene, the podcast where technology meets terrain and insights transform our understanding of the world. Hosted by industry experts with decades of experience, Sight and Scene dives into the cutting-edge tools and techniques reshaping how we visualize, map, and interact with the spaces around us.
In each episode, we explore the latest advancements in drones, GIS, CAD, geomatics, and scanning, showcasing applications not just in the built environment, but across a spectrum of industries, from environmental monitoring to urban development and beyond. We bring you stories from the field and interviews with fascinating people on the cutting edge of geospatial technology.
You found us, Sight and Scene, first episode. How are we doing, Scott?
Good. I'm excited to kick this off.
Yeah, likewise. It's always good to see you, even though we're on different sides of the country.
Well, that's the magic of technology, right?
Indeed.
After all, it's kind of part of this whole thing.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. We're kicking off this first episode. As the intro led in, Scott and I both come from diverse backgrounds, which we'll get into here in a little bit. In your words, Scott, like who do you think this podcast is for?
Yeah, so I don't want to be selfish and say I made this podcast for myself, but I hear so many people who are in the same boat as us, right?
Yep.
We're service providers, quote unquote, but it's more the idea that whether you're a small business or a single person trying to get started with drones, scanning, reality capture, I also hear the same thing from small or like mid-sized engineering firms. Same problems, right? They have a small team, there's like limited resources, and there's so much technology. The variety of drones and scanners and other tools out there is like almost so overwhelming that I kind of wanted to create a podcast to guide people through that and what worked for us, what's not working for us, and bring other people in and get some other perspectives.
Yeah, there's no shortage of technology coming down the pike with the industry. And having spent 26 years in construction, I've seen my fair share of technologies that promise the world and underdeliver, and some that deliver, and always seeking that magic bullet of either a workflow or a software throughout my career. It's really exciting to see how technology is transforming the industry, particularly production in this industry and production rates in particular. Like after World War II, there's all these studies about manufacturing and just the productivity gains in those industries where, I think the construction industry in particular, that's kind of the angle that I'm going to come at things from in this podcast, is that there hasn't been those types of gains in the industry. And I think technology is playing a piece. It's obviously, there's a lot more to it than just a piece of technology. It's how to use it, how to get the most out of it. Is it the right technology for your business and your firm? And, we're going to talk about a lot of those different ideas throughout this podcast, and bring in some fun hosts too.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Scott, maybe we can, we could dig in a little deeper to just give an intro to who we are, and why you should listen to us, because, maybe not put it that way, but what brought us here? What do we bring to you? And, what's backing up the content that we're providing? And I could kick it off on my end. So I've been a 26-year construction professional, working right out of college. I had a construction management degree, went to work for a big specialty contractor, one of the largest in the country, doing lots of interior framing, drywall, acoustical ceilings, claddings, plaster, that type of work. So, working on large commercial projects, high rises, hospitals. Did that for quite a while before transitioning to a mountain lifestyle. I just needed a change of pace. So moved to a ski town in Colorado, started building custom homes in Colorado, and some really, really incredible homes where, slope side, huge, massive homes, and kept finding myself wanting to do more from a sustainability standpoint with these homes. Like there's always a better way to build, and just understanding the science and building science behind that. So that started to drive my decision making on where I wanted to take my career, which ultimately brought me here to Portland, Oregon, where I currently reside. And I spent the last 9 years as the director of construction for an fully integrated design build firm that focused on sustainable development in buildings. And, we were kind of at the tip of the spear, so to speak, an internationally known company for delivering some of the most progressive buildings in the world, one of which was a fully certified living building, which I had the pleasure of managing and seeing through. So, throughout my career, well, I guess take a step back. So, started flying a drone. I've always been a photographer for most of my life and wanted to take that craft to the sky. Love technology. As a person, I've just always thrived in picking up technologies and just putting them to work for a particular use case. So I do want to talk a little bit more about that, but nonetheless, it started getting into the drone space about 3 years ago. And with my background in construction, I saw an immediate need and use for the tool in the industry. And being fortunate enough to be at a design build firm where we were fully integrated, started working the tool into our workflow and our process at the company very successfully. And just from that, started to see a multitude of benefits, and started providing those services outside of the business, and eventually grew to a point where it's now my full-time gig. So, for the last year plus, have been solely focused on that business. And the business is called Aerial Ethos. And, it'll be good to talk, Scott, how we connected. But the last thing I want to say is just my entire career, I've always had a high aptitude, I guess, for technology, in a sense that I was always, before, there's all these positions now for titles in big construction companies and engineering firms, like director of innovation. These people that are kind of they're corralling all of this new technology that's coming down the pike. And before, it was kind of a siloed approach where companies were had people on job sites that were trying to solve an issue or solve a need on that job, and they would create their own process. And before you know it, you have 10 different processes across 10 different projects. And it's just, it's really hard to manage and track that type of work. And then, it's a lot of people are recreating the wheel when it's already been solved on another project. And then you layer on top of that the technology that's continually coming our way. So even before these titles and these positions were out there, that was kind of the de facto position that I played in the companies throughout my career, where I was always taking technology and figuring the best way to use it for our business. And that's kind of been a creative outlet for me, because, sometimes in the grind of construction, you could really, be in the trenches, and it's tough work. The industry is very, very challenging at times. And, I could scratch that creative itch sometimes by geeking out and creating an awesome spreadsheet, or digging into software or a process for the business that really made sense and improved quality of life, and improved efficiency, and actually solves problems. So that's cool. That's where I'm coming at this from. And, really excited to dig in throughout this podcast on how we've both individually come out on the backside of being our own successful business owners in this space. Because a lot of people, if you watch YouTube, they make it seem like you just go buy a drone and there you go, you're making $100,000, right? Like it's
so easy.
It's so easy, but it's not. And, we're going to share a lot of how we got to where we are, and, some tips and tricks for that too. So I think there's going to be something for everybody in this podcast.
Yeah, I totally agree. And before I jump into a little bit about myself, I think what works so well about this is, Mike, you bring so much field experience in here. You've worked on so many actual projects. You have so much hands-on stuff. My journey is a little different, a little same, but a little different. I came in mainly through the traditional engineering side, right? My degree is in mechanical engineering. And I was really lucky I think I got a lucky start, kind of. My first job working as a mechanical engineer, it was a mechanical, like MEP, plumbing, HVAC, all that stuff. But I worked for a larger civil firm. And maybe more importantly than that, I had a mentor who was a real CAD nerd, just loved AutoCAD, lived and breathed it, and really taught me everything that I know about how not only to like get an engineering project done, but how to manage that whole technology side. It was a small department, so it really was like IT manager,
Right.
CAD standards person, all in one there. And I
Right.
got this incredible early exposure to both, okay, real world engineering projects, but just a complete master of AutoCAD was guiding me and helping me design projects and really, really show me how to do these projects right. And so, fast forward a little bit, I actually got my start in drones by nights and weekends working with another firm. Originally in Brooklyn, there was a drone startup company who was really trying to get into the cinematography market, which
Mm-hmm.
you might remember in the early days of drones, it was the cinema folks really, really paved the way and were the ones getting those early FAA approvals and such.
Strap a
Pre
GoPro
107,
on your drone.
yeah, and pre 107, which was exciting to see that process. And so I was just working actually as a mechanical engineer, helping them do designs for that kind of stuff. But I already had a little RC aircraft experience, which was actually my senior design project in college. So
Nice.
really had this interesting mishmash where my day job was going and doing AutoCAD drawings and compressed natural gas stations and HVAC retrofits in office buildings, and then my weekends, my free time was spent kind of pro bono offering up some mechanical engineering advice to these people who are trying to build their own drone. So that got really, really interesting, and that might set the stage for the rest of what my career was like. Long story short, that we went our separate ways. Those turns out, surprise, surprise, right? The people who wanted to design their own drone said, "Well, looks like we're just going to be able to buy one." You had
Right.
DJI. This was right as DJI was getting there. This was right as like Free Fly was getting involved, and so it was a very nice to have you, but we don't really need our own giant engineering staff.
Right.
But that like set the spark, like was set off once I worked with those people, because I was seeing, okay, I'm climbing rooftops, I'm climbing the top, I'm looking at HVAC equipment, and every moment from then on, I was like, well, what if I had that drone that we were working on while I was doing these like projects? And the day I saw photogrammetry, like the process of going from drone photos to 3D models, and again, I had all this CAD expertise, measuring up places by hand and going to buildings. That's like this, the dynamite got lit. I was just like, I totally think that merging these two here, I was trying to figure out how like my fun job on the side of working with drones and my, interesting but maybe routine day job, like they're not ever going to come together. And then the day I saw a photogrammetry program, I was like, oh my goodness, like these actually overlap a ton.
Yeah.
And
I always like to share
yeah,
with people in my presentations, like when I got into this and saw that, my mind was blown 10
yep,
times over at what was
yeah,
possible with this. It's incredible.
it really was like, it was the light bulb moment. And so from then on out, it was a bit of trying to convince that firm to use drones, but it was such early days. It still wasn't quite buy this drone and you're good. And I think the firm I was working for was kind of like staring down a 20-mile road every time I brought up a drone, and they were like, that's cool, maybe one day, right?
Cool,
And
but
yeah, and to their credit, it didn't necessarily make a lot of sense in what they had on their plate at the moment.
right.
Again, this was 10 plus years ago, have to remember, and so nothing was as easy as it is now, software integration wise. And so call me an impatient person, but I was like, not only do I think drones are going to be big with these engineering firms, I'm also looking at these like contracted IT guys that my firm has that come in to just fix anytime there's a thing with a computer. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, the drone's a flying computer, right? So I really was like, yeah, I think this could be a contracted IT kind of thing. I think this is something where a firm would actually, yeah, some of them do it in house, but maybe some are actually going to shop it out, because just like my boss didn't want to worry about who set up the router and the network at the office, why should he worry about anything that involves a pilot's license, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of the idea there. And so I broke off, started it with a good friend of mine. Originally, we were doing everything and anything, real estate photography, this and that. It was slightly up to that point. And then when I really got into the photogrammetry side of things, that's where, we really went all in on 3D modeling, all in on that stuff. And again, the CAD expertise started to fit in there. And so most of my clients, my company's Harrigan Aerial, and most of my clients today are architecture, engineering, survey firms who just do the same thing, are like looking for CAD, looking to figure out how to make their CAD workflow better, and find that the drone's a cool way to do it.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's really, I think it's why we've connected so well over the last year plus, and how we came together. But we're really coming at the industry because we're both focused. I wouldn't say primarily. Obviously, we do work outside of the AEC industry. And for those that maybe don't know, that's architecture, engineering, construction. But if you're tuned into this, you probably know what that is. But just in case, but yeah, I mean, I think a lot of our focus is in those industries, and that's where our expertise come from different perspectives. And I want to maybe share a little bit about how we met, and maybe talk about that virtual surveyor piece, because I think
Yeah.
that's important to the story too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So on my, I'll start with that. On my way to work on this, I had an opportunity that I really couldn't turn down, from a company called Virtual Surveyor, and I was already a pretty steady client of theirs. I don't think I was the first customer, but I think it was the first tranche of customers in the United States that was using their software, which is like kind of a part of how you go from these complicated drone point clouds to more simpler CAD friendly deliverables. And I was using it a ton, and they had an opening for a sales role, and I took it. I was very, very interested, and I loved the software. And I did that stint for a bit there, and along the way, one of the several customers I had who was looking into the software was Mike here. And a lot of people, I'll tell this part and then you can fill in the rest if you want.
Okay.
A lot
Yeah.
of people come and ask questions like, where is the button to open a file? Where is how do I draw a line? And I seem to recall you came in hot with like, I've got foundation volume calcs I want to do. I've already set up the project. It's like set up completely perfect already. Like you got the
Yeah.
whole thing set up, and you're like, I'm more interested in like the where do I take this next? Like maybe I don't think you came out asking exactly what the business side of it was like, but I think that was already like you were already well past figured out the program. You're like, what's next?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think we had some really, really good conversations there back and forth, and like email support tickets that just turned into more business level discussions.
Right.
And
Right.
and that was it. And I think we were like, we should keep in touch.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And that's kind of where it started. There was always great conversations, which led to all kinds of discussions that, of course, were relevant to the work that you were doing and the support you were providing. And it's funny, as even still when I reach out to folks at Virtual Surveyor, like I'll get like, wow, you're doing this with that? Like that's been one of those things throughout my career, is like, you're doing what with our software? Like, that's really cool. We hadn't thought of that. So that's
Yeah.
always been, I don't know, that's always been a fun part of me, like pushing a software technology to the limits, or craft it in a way that people hadn't really thought of the end user using it that way. And then they start like thinking about like, wow, that's great. And even a lot of times I've been a consultant to some of the software companies that we've used to help that end, that kind of user experience on the back end, and improvement. So that's always been a fun kind of partnership throughout my career as well, is working with some of our partners, because they are partners. They really are. And I think the good ones know that, and they really honor that aspect of it. So, and
Yeah.
I think that Virtual Surveyor is one of those. Like it's a great piece of software, and great folks. And I'm sure we'll have more to say about different softwares out there throughout this podcast, but I think it's good to highlight the ones that we know work well, and
Yeah.
and not that we're here to promote or sell any particular service, but we're going to share the ones that we know work well for us, and I think
Yeah.
that's it's partly why we're here. All right, so Scott, you mentioned photogrammetry, and again, I'm assuming everybody joining this podcast may not know a lot of the terminology, and one thing that I've learned about being in any industry is that there's lots of jargon, there's lots of terminology, there's lots of acronyms. So I think just being self-aware of throughout this podcast, like making sure that we could clarify some of these things. So photogrammetry, I think would be good. We touched on that a little bit, but possibly a little bit more. And then I think, again, sharing more about all the tools like that make up reality capture, because I think we have reality capture as a buzzword in a big part of this podcast. So maybe we can clarify what our understanding of reality capture is, and what are the tools of the trade that we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, definitely. Always great to start off episode 1 with a large word like photogrammetry, right?
Yeah.
Nothing gets a crowd more photo what than when I drop that word. I'll start with that. So, because that's where I started in this business, and I see people working their way through that too. So, photogrammetry, fancy word, but it just means the ability to measure from photos. And specifically, we do that by making a 3D model or something called a point cloud, which we'll get into, which is just a way to take basically tons and tons of measurements in 3D space and bring that into your CAD program, or use it in some way to get information from that, usually measurements of a building or terrain. And it fits into that larger concept of reality capture. And I'll give you my opinion on what reality capture means to me. I think it can differ among different people, but to me, it's documenting and measuring a space as realistically as possible. And usually when I say as realistically as possible, that means 3D at a minimum. And this is what all this technology that we're working on is really doing. If you think, I started my career in very much a 2D world. You walk around a site, you do floor 1 of a space, you measure with a laser distance measure, and you just bring that into your drawing. But now with reality capture, it's so much more about documenting the space exactly as it is, and then later in the office, pulling the stuff you need from that to get to your deliverable or what your first project on your plate is. And some other technologies, because I started out in photogrammetry. Why? Because it was cheap and easy. You just need a photo, any kind of camera is how you can start.
Right.
And drones are just flying cameras, so they're great at that. And then from there, I branched out more into LiDAR and laser scanning, which I think you'll see those two as pretty much the most popular capture options you have out there. And laser scanning is very similar because it also creates that point cloud, and we'll get into exactly what that is in the future. But the laser scan lets you do things the photos cannot in certain areas. Like, for example, getting measurements underneath a dense canopy on a LiDAR, because the laser scanner is actually shooting lasers and not dependent on the light. You can actually capture areas that are either obscured, like terrain under vegetation, or especially as I got to more and more indoor work or, groundwork, when you have bad lighting conditions or you're walking through like hallways and office space, laser scanning is so much better because it eliminates a lot of the problems you have with photos, like reflective issues and especially dark areas that aren't well lit.
Right.
We scan a lot of spaces that are really, really tough to see visually. And so laser scanning is just another great tool in the toolbox. But it goes beyond all that, right? It goes into software, because all these scans get put into something. It's often a CAD program, but I'm sure we'll cover in a future podcast GIS. That's another big aspect of this.
Love
how do you manage
GIS.
all this stuff? Exactly. And a lot of my experiences guiding my clients through the right capture technology brings them into, well, what's the right way to view and analyze this stuff? A lot of times the software they've got sitting on the shelf, sometimes it's the right way to look at this and view it. Sometimes it's not. And so I think when we talk about reality capture, it's big. It's the software it takes to view this, the tools to share this data, but also the hardware and software that scans and captures it. So I started in drones, and life was pretty simple. And then I really got into way more stuff. Now I do ground laser scanning, mobile laser scanning, and I know you as well, Mike,
Yep.
have gotten into this. And I
Well,
think
drones are the gateway drug for the industry, I
exactly
think.
that's it. Once you're hooked on that, you're like, well, what else is out there?
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but exactly, I think we can. If it's one thing I've heard from a lot of people that motivated me to jump into this podcast, it's I've got tool A, I want to expand or I want to grow or just see what's out there. What's the next step for me, and what's the other tool that'll get this done? And I'm amazed how many times I talk to somebody who has been using one of these tools very successfully and happy, but then they're
Hmm.
like, well, what's next? They have the same problem. They have the same problem they had when they first got into drones, of the overwhelming amount of options, right? What's the next
Yep.
option for me? So
Right.
that's something to consider.
Yeah. Yeah. And from my perspective, reality capture, obviously echoes a lot of what you said, but I'm thinking about it in a construction context of, obviously, the technological revolution we've been in for a while, all the way from when people stopped drawing by hand. Well, some people still draw by hand, but like moving to CAD and drawing things digitally, to then the 3D space with BIM, where projects get modeled before they're built to help people coordinate and clash detection and all the things that BIM is incredible for. But then the reality capture piece to me is the counterpart of BIM, where now you're validating those as built conditions. So I think documenting and validating some of those things are hugely important, because they could help streamline the process, or when things go south, you could quickly coordinate and answer questions and solve problems. So I think it's fascinating in that sense. And reality capture is not, maybe a little fancy way of just saying that it's cameras. People have been taking photos on job sites for forever, but the thing that I noticed throughout my career is that the rigor and process around how you're capturing photos of jobs became much more refined. And then now the tools that we have at our disposal, everybody has a digital camera in their phone or smartphone in their hand on a job site. You have 360 cameras capturing information. You have robots walking through job sites with LiDAR scanners and 360 photos capturing information. You have drones flying in the air. You have mobile laser scanners. You have tripod laser scanners. So it's like there's just so many tools, and to me, it's not something that um, that these technology companies, or maybe these hardware companies, are just pushing these products
Yes.
because there's no value, because obviously there's a value to this, and people are figuring out how to get that value out. And I think that's an important part of where we're going with this podcast, because I feel like in my business, that's a big part of what I bring to the table as somebody who has 26 years in construction, of like, here's how you get the most out of this data and this information. And a lot of times I'm like, I'm not in the drone business, I'm in the data business.
Yeah.
We're providing data in the form of 3D visuals and 3D information. And we will get into point clouds and all these things, but just in the broadest term, point clouds are millions and millions of points. And to think about the software piece you were talking about, Scott, is that in the olden days, some of this information would be delivered to people, and probably what gave a sour taste in somebody's mouth is they tried to open it, it would crash their computer, because it's just massive amounts of data that technology at the time didn't really have either the horsepower, or people hadn't quite figured out yet how to, one, deliver this software, and two, how to do it in a way that people can actually use it, right? So it's like,
Yep.
oh, that's really cool, you got all this great information, but it's unusable by me, because my computer, I get the spinning wheel of death every time I try to open this thing. So that that aspect of this business has come a long way, where now the intuitiveness that really needs to be integrated into that user experience has to be there. Or, I mean, for any software company in this day and age, like, the intuitive use of it and the ease of use, it kind of plays into this whole project management aspect of this business where, you need to create deliverables, but you need to give it to somebody in a way that they're going to use it. And
Yeah.
it's easy to use, and it's understandable. And then you layer in AI into this whole equation. And it's like, holy cow, like there's so much to talk about.
Yeah, there really is. And I think you hit the nail on the head there, talking about like just being able to share and this data like crashing someone's computer, right? I constantly run into with my clients that yeah, how many times have you heard, well, you know what, just give me the pictures because I can open that. Right?
Yeah, right.
Photos and video have like almost spoiled us for so long because of how digestible they are. But it's important to remember, maybe I'm dating myself, that like once upon a time it was really hard to view a video on the internet, like really, really hard, right? And now we have
Yeah.
YouTube, and I do think it's all heading that way. It seems to be getting, in general, more easier to do, more familiarity with 3D models and 3D types, and we're seeing all this cool technology come up to kind of solve those problems. But we're in this really interesting transitional phase where it's not YouTube yet. It's not so, I joke like my grandma doesn't know what a point cloud is. My mom doesn't know what a point cloud is. I don't know if we'll get there, and I don't know if we need to get there, but at least be interesting when we one day get to a point where at least everyone in an engineering firm knows what a point cloud is, right? Everyone in an architecture firm knows what a
Right.
point cloud is. Maybe we will. But in the meantime, there's this really interesting connect between getting paid to go out and capture this data and then bring it to somebody to make it that easy. Like I like to say, YouTube easy to view and open and get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm excited to dispel some of these old or antiquated ideas about some of these deliverables and this technology, because it has become considerably easier to share and use this information. And I know we mentioned GIS too, and how much we both kind of have shared our love of GIS, but traditionally, and I'm sure I know we'll talk a lot more about this, but thinking about, like, people used to think, well, GIS is just a program for governments to use because it's so cumbersome and so complicated, and the learning curve is so ridiculous. And now that has changed significantly, where GIS is such a powerful tool that has become way more intuitive to use, way more accessible for private institutions and companies. And I think I'm excited about seeing that being adopted more and more.
Yeah.
Because it is, like, talk about like geeking out on awesome software. Just, my mind's always like, it's a 3-dimensional spreadsheet that's place-based, and so anyway, lots of fun stuff to dig into.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's it. I always like tell people, I'm like, okay, you have a spreadsheet over here and you have Google Maps. Now, what if they could talk, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
right.
okay. Yeah. But I'm glad you brought that up. I know we'll get into GIS in a whole different episode, I'm sure. But it is a really interesting topic that I do encourage people to look into and even just get some basic familiarity in, because it is very often like the finish line for a project for us, where they get information, a client will get information and say, okay, but what do I do with this? And often you can take it into a JS program, and that's where it goes from the data to the answers, right? That's where you can be like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I can measure and find the highest point on my site, or figure out what the steepest slope is in some area, or, oh, and now I have this data from the state or from the county of, parcels or lots or whatever we have, like temperatures, some other thing that they want, and they can finally stack your captured stuff on top of their existing stuff.
Right.
And that's where I see like I've had some of my favorite moments working in like consulting have been that, where you have like 3 or 4 engineers or architects huddled in front of the screen. Somebody drags and drops their data set on top of yours, and they're like, that's it, that's everything. Wow, that's what we need. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And
I love it.
Yeah, I live for those moments. And so I'm excited, really excited to get into GIS, because I was very self-taught on that. I had a mentor for the CAD stuff, and I can talk CAD all day long, but JS was something I stumbled into as well as the answer to a lot of problems I was looking to solve for my clients. So
yeah,
I'm excited.
Same. Yeah, same here. Self-taught in GIS, and in a lot of ways too, I think a lot of these softwares, for me, at least my learning style is I like to take those deep dives, because when I'm trying to learn a specific thing, I learn 10 other things along the way. And I think there's a ton of value in that. And I think that's a little bit lost on some of the folks coming through now. They're just like, well, just give me the answer and tell me how to do it. And then you maybe lose out a little bit on the journey along the way that taught you 10 other things to get there.
Yep.
That's another episode.
So. Yeah. The joy of finding things out, right? That's
exactly.
That
Feynman, making mistakes. Making
there
mistakes. You go. Those are important too. So obviously you're on the East Coast. I'm on the West Coast, and we started. I can't remember what the impetus was, but I think there was maybe an opportunity I was looking at where I felt a little out of my depth, and I wanted to check in with you and just see how things were going. And I was also very curious when I heard that you went back to your company, just like, hey, how's it going? That's awesome. We're obviously both building businesses here, and I think it's always good for folks to share. I'm not one to hoard information, or
Same.
It's like, I always love this saying that if you're concerned about competition, at the end of the day, someone still has to do it better than you. And I feel like I do it pretty damn well. So, I'm always like, I take comfort in that, not to pat my own back, but I take comfort in that it's good to share, bring the business up or bring the industry up, because there's a lot to know. There's a lot to share. And I think the more people that are responsible, using this technology responsibly in this industry, I think the better off we're going to be, because it's the people that come in that are misinformed or don't have the information and get themselves into trouble or put out some bad information that can really be problematic. And I think that's what creates scenarios where people are really apprehensive to use some of these technologies. They're like, well, you promised me this, and what you gave me is not that at all. So, a lot of what we're going to talk about is, appropriate use of this technology. And it's always understanding your tolerances of your equipment, what it's capable of doing, the methodology behind collecting data, and then of course the processing. So there's just a lot of steps we're going to get into throughout the podcast, and hopefully shed a lot of light for folks on how to integrate some of these things into your business.
Yeah. And I think, I think that's a big reason we connected. And again, another big reason we're doing this podcast. I think we're both of like the sharing mindset. I'm the exact same way. I know some people are like, oh, it's your secret sauce, so you're giving that away. Same exact thing. I'm of the Apple great artists steal kind of mindset of it really is all about the execution. I don't think I've ever walked away with one bit of information and be like, haha, now I've got it.
Yeah, right.
That's it. The money, the entire market is all mine.
Yeah.
So, on the flip side, though, I have given information to people, and even just our conversations back and forth, I've gotten little nuggets that help me execute on my business and really, really made a project more profitable or faster for me. And usually, I want to say 90% of the time, that was done by somebody who went through the struggle and then was generous enough to pass it on and be like, I went through this. I don't want anyone else to have to go through this. So here it is, so you don't have to. And I think we both are have that kind of mindset on, if we can, we all stand on the shoulders of giants. And if we started at B because someone else did A, I'm happy. We're both happy to pass along step C to somebody, because it just makes everyone's life easier. And on that
gotta
same thing,
gotta pay it back.
Yeah. And just like you said, when you're looking at clients and they're concerned if the technology is legitimate, and maybe they've seen a lot of stuff in marketing and they've worked with groups that have promised the world, all the more reason, I think, to have like a shared group of resources or bring people in and have discussions where like, okay, where did it really actually help us? Like no marketing, no marketing pizzazz. Where did it actually make me money? And also where did we fall a little on our face a bit? Where did we run into something where I really thought the drone or the scanner or the software was going to do it, and it just didn't cut it, or we found a better way that I didn't know about.
Yeah. I think it's it's always important to come at it from a perspective of what problem are we trying to solve.
Yeah.
It's that problem statement of, okay, what are we trying to do here with this particular tool or software or workflow? Because I think that people sometimes get distracted by this shiny new thing over here,
Yep.
and like, ooh, look at this, and then
Yes,
it's like, okay,
exactly.
is it solving a problem? Or yeah, and I would say maybe the flip side of that coin is this is how we've always done it kind of mentality.
Yep.
And I think that can be equally problematic, possibly,
Yeah.
where people are, I think you have, in today's world, you just have to adopt appropriate technologies. And I always like to frame technology as appropriate technology, because not all technology is appropriate. And, I think people adopting need to be doing it for the right reasons and what's appropriate for their business. So, I think that's always been, it's always been something that's critical for a company's growth, or you're gonna die in the vine. I just think
Yep.
that's today's world. If you're not adopting technology, then you're going to be losing a competitive edge. And it's really, again, just about finding what is the right technology.
Yep. I think you put it a really right way of like, I see it as like there are these two extreme positions. And one extreme is this is perfect. We just have to buy this tool and it'll solve our problems. Usually not the case. But right. The
Yeah.
other extreme is that's a fancy thing that I'll never need. And I'm cool just keeping doing it the way we do it. And, why change?
Mm-hmm.
Because what we've got is working. And who cares if our competitors are looking at this stuff? That's not for me.
Yeah.
So somewhere in that middle ground is a
Yeah.
sweet spot.
Yeah. And not to discount this is the way we've always done it, because there's obviously credence to that, because if it's
Sure.
worked, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But, I like to push the comfort level on that. And I have in the companies I've worked for. And I think it's a healthy experience for a company, or maybe that's not the right word, but it's a good way for people to test where they're at with their current processes and tools and such. Because what I find interesting sometimes when I'm calling a new client or talking to a contractor, and I share a little bit about what I do, or maybe they didn't hear enough to be like, oh, well, I'm going to put you in touch with our marketing folks. I'm like, well, that's great. Because when people
Right.
hear drones, they're like, oh, you
Right.
could go take some pictures of our job from the sky, and that's great.
And
But
that's all it's ever good for. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. I run into that all the time too.
But if they only knew. And it's really building this business is like any business, I suspect, is, there's a lot of educating that has to happen. And
Yeah.
just another case in point why we're here.
Yeah.
So maybe a little bit of it is self-serving, but I don't know. Like I think we've said we like to share. I feel like at this point in my career, I feel like it's this society, just to an extent, should operate this way, that as you progress through the years and you gain all this knowledge, that you should be in a mentorship role, and you should be sharing and giving back to the people that helped you along the way. So yeah, I don't know if you have any more thoughts about future episodes and guests. I think maybe just general structure that we're going to riff on stuff, you and I. We're going to bring in industry experts. We're going to, I think.
Yeah. I'm starting with restraint, if you haven't noticed, because I'm an extremely opinionated person, and that will come out sooner or later. So I'm trying to give us one good episode of without Scott getting on his soapbox. But all like joking aside, I not to maybe pigeonhole us early, but I do kind of see this fitting into one of two boats. Episodes fitting into generally one or two structures. One will be the business level, or maybe like the social level of it, right? Like you said, how do we know if it's successful or not? How do I implement this technology? How do I win over my colleagues and, the hires up on adopting this? Or what do I need to prove? And then I do see, maybe in the same episode, but probably in more dedicated episodes, a deep dive into a tricky technical aspect. I know we talked about coordinate systems and
right.
how that could be 5 episodes if we wanted to.
Yeah.
But I do like the idea of finding the tough nuggets that people get stuck on very commonly, and talking through those and offering some words of wisdom or just what we've experienced to get through that.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, this was fun for me first time around, and I'm excited to do more. And I hope everyone listening got a little flavor of what we're going to be bringing to you in this podcast. And we look forward to seeing you on the next one. So thanks for joining, and we'll be seeing you soon.
See ya.